All right, it looks like we might be live. Just going to do a check on my side to confirm. We'll get started in just a moment here. Yes, indeed. Well, hello there, and welcome to another weekly Analytics Office Hours. I'm so glad you're here, and if you have any questions today, please leave a comment. I'm here to answer your analytics, data science, and career questions. I've got several technical tools, SQL, Power BI, Python, potentially others, Excel if you want to ask Excel questions. Really, any kind of analytics question, I'm here to answer it for you. So feel free to leave a question in the chat, and we're going to start with those, and I'll answer as many as I can today. And if we don't have any questions, I'll move on to a prepared topic for today. If we do get to that point, I plan on walking you through our analytics maturity assessment a little bit more and just having a good discussion about how an organization can advance in analytics maturity. So happy to walk through that if we don't have any questions. But let's see your questions. If you're on the call today, leave a question in the chat, and let's have a good discussion. I'd love to help. We've had some good discussions in the past on different SQL techniques, really taking a business challenge or a use case and turning it into, a lot of times it's multiple SQL functions used in conjunction with each other. The idea of nesting functions, we've done some of those in past sessions. We have also had a really good, I think it was 2 weeks ago, had a really good discussion on techniques to advance in your career. You've got a long-term idea, I want to be a data analyst, but here's the opportunities that I have right now. Which one should I pursue? That was a really good conversation. I think that was 2 weeks ago. All of these are recorded. One more thing I should say from the start, if you have any really personal things, matters maybe on your career, or any company specific things, whether it's data or use cases, you really want to keep those high level. Don't include anything sensitive about your company or yourself. You could maybe generalize it, but I would not recommend including anything here that you don't want to be publicly available. These ultimately get posted on my YouTube channel so that others who aren't able to make it here live can view it later. But let's have a discussion. Go ahead and leave a chat or leave a message in the chat, and we'll take a look. Again, if not, we will move on to another topic. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'm going to switch to your question if we eventually do get some questions. But in the meantime, maybe we do talk about analytics maturity. All right, to do that, I'm going to head over to our website here, valuedrivenanalytics.com, for a guided discussion. Again, keeping an eye on the chat here in case there are any questions that come in. But let's go over to the website. All right, here we are on valuedrivenanalytics.com. As I mentioned last time, this is one of the main featured things here, the Analytics Maturity Transformation Assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Learn More here. It's going to take us to a quiz, 34 questions. You fill it out, probably takes you about 10 minutes. There's only 3 options for each question, as you can see here. And you take this quiz, and within a day or two, you're going to get a customized PDF that highlights what your level of analytics maturity is on a scale of 1 to 3 and breaks it out by category. So you know where to focus and where you're doing well. And it's also not going to leave you there, but it's going to give you recommendations on how to improve in those areas. Any areas where, based on how you answered it, there could be some opportunities to improve. We're going to give you specific recommendations on how to get to the next level. So I highly recommend taking this. It's free, but we're going to use this as a guide to continue talking about analytics maturity. Now, check out our last 3 weekly office hours where we've been going through, 1 or 2 questions a session as we have time to see some of these other questions. But we've already talked about how business strategy decisions are made and how you can ideally do that with data-driven decision making, and especially using A/B testing. It's a great way to see if an initiative is working. We've already talked about as well how to make a dashboard or analysis more actionable, make it very clear what next steps should be taken. You really want to focus your analytical presentations on the next steps, the recommendations, not so much your methodology. Talk a little bit about your methodology, but not too much. How often do executives and stakeholders get confused? We talked about that in the past as well. It goes along with the previous question. You want to keep it high level, focus on the insights, focus on the recommendations. Now, let's talk a little bit about question 4 here. I think this is where we left off with the last one. When your organization is hiring an analyst, does it use analytics case questions? First option, no, we mainly use behavioral questions. Nothing wrong with behavioral questions. They're very popular, and as an analyst, you should be prepared to answer the common behavioral questions out there. Tell me about a project that you've done in the past. You should be very familiar with your resume, able to and ready, thinking about how you would speak to any project on your resume that could come up. You should be able to answer general questions like, tell me about a time you faced a conflict, or you've worked on a team, all kinds of typical behavioral questions out there. Prepare in advance for those so you're not left fumbling to come up with a response on the spot if you don't have to. It's good to be able to think on your feet, but if you know that there's a good likelihood a question could come up, you might as well prepare a response in advance. Maybe you ask some basic questions about analytics, and that's okay. But I think you'll probably find some people who have maybe taken a lot of trainings but haven't done much application. And so they'll look at that question and they'll maybe be able to answer it. Maybe they've studied machine learning techniques or SQL techniques, and they say, yeah, I know 3 parts of a SQL statement, select, from, and group by. And they're able to give you that. But then when it comes to actually doing the job, they're not able to really apply it in a robust way or tailor a SQL query to a business question. And that's where the business case questions come in. You give a business scenario and ask them how they would approach it, maybe with a technique or tool. Maybe you just keep it wide open and see, kind of assess their analytical thought process. So I highly recommend, if you are looking for an analyst, to use business case questions. And as an analyst, as an aspiring analyst, I highly recommend that more and more organizations are using business case questions. So the way you prepare for those is to not just learn the concepts. We've got lots of trainings that you can go through to learn the concepts, but you'll also notice that a lot of our trainings don't just teach the concepts or talk about the concepts, they're applying it to a real use case. And so that's good, but eventually you need to do that yourself as well and take the time to say, okay, I've learned about SQL, I've learned about data science. Let me actually apply this to a real use case, something you're interested in, maybe something your company's facing, and then perhaps get feedback on it as well. And there's lots of ways you can do that. There might be other in-house experts at your current company that you can reach out to, do some peer review, ask for them to review it, and just networking with other analysts. Usually someone's going to be willing to take a quick look at your work. All right, so again, I'll keep walking through this, but do we have any questions? I'm keeping an eye on the chat if there's something in particular that someone needs help with. Well, in the meantime, we'll keep talking through the quiz here. How many analytics projects, think of a typical dashboard build or an ad hoc analysis, does the typical analyst complete in 1 week? So this question kind of speaks to the level of efficiency of analyst at your organization. The first option here, typical analytics project, takes more than 1 week to complete. It takes more than 1 week to complete the typical dashboard build or the typical ad hoc analysis. Typical being a key word here. Certainly, there's probably some really complex dashboards or really complex analysis that could take more than 1 week on occasion. But if that's happening for the for most dashboards or most analyses that an analyst is being assigned, it's taking more than 1 week, it's likely there's an opportunity to improve efficiency there. Let's talk about some ways you could do that. If it is taking more than 1 week, it may be likely that they're using manual tools. Perhaps they're doing the whole thing with a point and click tool, maybe Excel. That's going to slow you down versus doing it more in a more automated way. Maybe using SQL, Python, Power BI. The other thing, maybe even more importantly, that could help here is using reusable assets. When you get an analysis or a dashboard request, if you're starting from scratch each time, it's likely that you're going to redo some things that maybe you've done for similar analyses in the past. So taking the time to maybe organize and create a reusable asset for similar types of requests, and we're talking about the typical dashboard build. Typically, on average, when you get a dashboard request, a lot of times, especially if you've been in that role for at least a few months, you probably have had a similar request in the past. So you may be able to, especially if you're using SQL or Python, reuse a SQL or Python script and just adapt it for the current use case. And that's going to save you so much more time. And now every dashboard analysis is probably going to be different. So there's going to be some customization you need to do. But you're not starting from scratch. You're starting with a reusable asset that just generally works for that kind of an analysis. Even if you haven't intentionally designed a reusable asset, which I would highly recommend, that's the idea of, if we're talking about a model build, for instance, creating a script that automatically does your data exploration, at the top, it's parameterized. You set, here's my target variable, here's my input variables, here's my data set. Now go through this list of tasks. Maybe it's imputing the median for missing values. Maybe it's taking your categorical variables and turning them into binary indicator variables, one-hot encoding. All of that data manipulation steps that you would want to do, even maybe testing different algorithms, you set that up in a script. So that would be like creating an intentional, reusable asset that I'm going to start with for most modeling use cases. Highly recommend that. But even if you haven't intentionally set something up like that, if you've been in the past coding out your analysis or your data manipulation in SQL, Python, maybe another tool like RSAS, what's going to happen is a lot of times you will have already a starting query that you can use and customize to that use case. Again, you're not starting from scratch because you've coded out the data manipulation. Versus if you've been doing everything in Excel up until then, you've got a whole set of keystrokes, point and click manipulation that you've got to do. You don't have anything coded out that you can start with. So a lot of times this comes down to the tools and techniques you're using, making sure you're using especially coding tools here and automation tools, but also being intentional about creating reusable assets. And that's what's going to help you go from maybe taking more than a week to complete the typical project to maybe being able to complete 3 or more projects per week. You can complete much more, depending on the scope of the project, of course. But typically, most weeks, completing 3 or more projects, that's a pretty efficient analyst. All right, let's move on to the next one. How often do analysts work on projects that could help your organization proactively without being asked? Boy, stakeholders love an analyst who will proactively do things to help the group. Let's say I'm a sales analyst, and hopefully, this is a great thing to do if you're not today, having regular stakeholders with the sales management team, or maybe someone they delegate to handle their analytics requests for them. Whoever it is that would kind of prioritize all the different projects from the sales teams, having a regular meeting with them, maybe weekly, maybe every other week, whatever makes sense, but to talk about their request. Now, what stakeholders are maybe used to, the typical analyst will wait to be asked for some analysis. Hey, sales leadership, what do you need me to pull today? What what data sets do you need me to pull? What reporting do you need me to create? What analysis do you need me to do? And they just are, you might call it order takers, right? They are waiting to be told what to do. But boy, it can be a real differentiator as an analyst if you go into that meeting and of course, you're going to ask if they have anything top of mind and work on that, or at least have a discussion about it with them, of their request. But then you're also able to say, tell me about your business challenges. What are the things that are keeping you up at night today? And they tell you their business challenges, which they're very familiar with. They're the sales experts. And then you as an analytics expert who's maybe done some analysis in the past, perhaps for previous companies, or what's possible with analytics as an analytics expert, you kind of say, well, actually, there's some techniques that could help with that. We could use our data to help inform some things that might help you make better decisions or help you solve that business challenge you're facing. So you bring up those methods and those potential projects to your sales stakeholders based on listening to the business challenge. Sales leadership is going to be an expert there, but then taking your expertise in analytics and how it can address those things that they're bringing up to you. And you're working together to maybe brainstorm some projects that are even higher value than what you would have gotten if it was just the sales leadership asking for a certain report, because the sales leadership, they're more familiar again with the business challenges they're facing. They probably have some high level analytics knowledge, but as an analyst, you may be able to work together to come up with a really high value project that they just didn't even know was possible with analytics. So now you're collaborating on use cases and these regular meetings, prioritizing the projects that we think are going to drive the most value. A good way to assess that is always asking the question of what would we do differently depending on the outcome of this analysis or this project that we're working on. Would it change a decision? And if the answer is no, you might not want to prioritize that. It means it's more of a nice to know thing. Sometimes you just got to go ahead and proceed with those, but most of the time you want to avoid working on the nice to knows and really focus on the projects that could result in a different decision being made, and especially decisions that are going to have potentially a big impact on the business when you make the right decision versus the wrong decision. So just some recommendations on how you as an analyst can proactively recommend analyses. And sometimes you might just proactively look into something, especially if you've gotten really efficient at your job and you have some extra time and say, I think this could be valuable. Let me just go ahead and see if there's anything interesting here. And maybe you look into it and you don't really find anything surprising or that would change a decision. So you don't bring it up necessarily, or you could and say, I was looking into this, by the way, and I didn't find anything. I just wanted to let you know that I took a look at that and just kind of confirmed what we thought. Or hopefully, maybe sometimes you do your proactive analysis and you find something really interesting, and then you bring that up to your stakeholders in a future stakeholder meeting. Wow, that is so cool that you just proactively looked at that, and yeah, that could be an opportunity for us. And then you go from there. All right. So that's a way to differentiate yourself. One way to differentiate yourself as an analyst. All right, I'm just going to take a quick break here and ask if anybody has a question. If you've got a question, a use case for today, technical question, career question, put in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on it, and I would love to address your specific use case. But in the meantime, if I don't see anything come through the chat, just keep going through the analytics maturity assessment here. So we'll click next here, and you notice I didn't answer any of those questions. If you don't know the answer to one of these questions, you can just skip it and you'll still get the PDF. But do not have to answer every single question here, so keep that in mind. Okay, next question. Does a typical analyst have a career development plan? So now we've been talking about some things that are kind of on the analyst, although I guess you could say it's on the manager to train these things as well. But this is more perhaps on the leadership side of things, right? So if you're an analytics manager or senior manager or director, if you have direct reports, make sure your team has a career development plan. I would say every person on your team. And this probably applies to any kind of employee, right? Every employee ought to have a career development plan, according to me, and according to a lot of people. Sometimes the answer is not really. It's just not a priority. You see a lot of managers that are just, looking at the latest fire drills. What I mean by that is like the latest important thing to their manager, and their focus is on getting those things done that their manager has requested, which is an important part of their job and your job as well. But it ends up being just day in and day out, it's all about the latest fire drill, right? Or the latest project. And there's never the time taken to really discuss your career or build your skills. So that's not good. That's going to eventually lead to potentially burnout, or the analysts getting frustrated because they're not maybe progressing in their career. And so that could lead to turnover. And turnover is very expensive to an organization. But more than that, it's just the right thing to do, right? We should care about our employees, and one way of doing that is helping them to grow in their career if they want to. There are certainly employees out there that maybe are content in their role and say, oh, kind of good where I am, and that might be okay. Although, in some cases, you might need to challenge that if you see the potential, especially these days, of, well, if you don't progress in your career, there's more and more automation tools coming out. At a certain point, you're going to need to grow and learn some of these things in order for this career to really be viable. And so, as a manager, you might need to challenge them in that way, perhaps. But some people are content to kind of just keep doing things the way they have, and others are a little bit more proactive, and they want to see career growth. I think most people want to see career growth, right? And it may not be leadership or management for everybody, but at least grow as an individual contributor, learn more advanced tools, become more efficient to have a bigger impact. And a lot of times that leads to more compensation, which isn't the only driver of going to work, but a lot of times that's a big driver for why people have chosen to go to work each day. So the next option here is, yes, they have a career development plan, but it's not very intensive or rarely followed. Maybe it's a pretty low bar. Maybe it's something like, I want to build one model this year. That's a pretty low bar to, if you're trying to get into data science, it is a baby step to build one model, but it's going to be slow progression. Better than not having any goals at all. Or, hey, you set the goals, but then you kind of forget about it. Again, the fire drills that come up every day, every week, just take precedence, and you end up going a year, revisiting. A lot of times companies will have employees revisit the goals they set at the beginning of the year and evaluate them. And you look at it and say, yeah, I didn't really get to that this year. I guess I'll put it on the list for next year. And sometimes organizations look at that and say, well, if you didn't reach that goal, then that's going to impact your performance. Or other times they say, well, yeah, that would have been nice, but hey, you helped us with all the fire drills, so you're good. Just put it on the list for next year. So you might do okay, but you're not really building skills over the course of the year. So the final option that we would really recommend is, yes, they do have a career development plan. It's rigorous, and it ultimately, because either it's a good level of intensity, it's a good level of challenge for the individual, and it's actually being followed. For both of those reasons, it does lead to career growth. If you've got a career development plan, but it's not actually materializing in career growth for that individual, one of those things has gone off. Either it's maybe not the right plan tailored to their growth, or it's a good plan, but it's not being followed. So you need a manager, and it's a manager and analyst collaborating together to work toward their career development. And everyone has kind of a different take on this. I've shared in some of my trainings, I've tried to be this manager in the past. I've had some really good managers in the past that I actually felt like they cared more about my development than I did myself. And that felt really good, and it helped me a lot. And it set me up to be a good analyst and a good manager in the future. And so, if when I had the opportunity to be a manager, and if you have an opportunity to be a manager, I'd highly recommend this as well. I wanted to be that kind of manager for my employees and really invest in their growth. But knowing that, hey, they've got to be invested and really put in the work for this as well. I'm going to put in the work to give them advice, give them support when they run into questions or errors in their analytics or leadership challenges that we're talking about. But they've got to put in the work to maybe take a course or do the things that we talk about. So it's definitely a partnership. Now you've got other managers out there, and it's definitely the case. It's just the reality of it. It's kind of unfortunate in some ways, where again the fire drills take precedence above everything. There's very few career growth conversations, and so many people will tell you you've got to own your own development. And when a manager is saying that, I kind of see that a little bit as a cop out. Like, no, the development's on you. You've got to own your development. Like, it's not going to be my focus. Again, I think it should be a partnership. I think that's a good balance. It's got to be both. The manager ideally is invested in their team's development, but certainly I get that the reality is that your manager won't. Maybe you will have some managers that aren't as invested in your career development. So you do need to own your development. So if you're an analyst, own your development. Hopefully you'll have some managers that really, really do invest in you and partner with you in that process. But even if you don't, if you own your development and always looking for ways to improve, we've got a lot of trainings on how to do that in our YouTube channel. You're looking for ways to build a brand as a leader. You're proactively pursuing things. You're trying to be efficient. Even if your manager's not pushing you to do that, that's good. That's a way to own your development. But if you are a manager, I would recommend investing in a career development plan and really holding your team accountable. Don't just have an annual review with your employees. Maybe have a quarterly review, at least a formal quarterly review. But really, this could come down to a weekly basis type thing. Weekly updates, I took them for granted at one point until I realized that not everybody does a weekly update. You may report to somebody and maybe they meet with you every other week, which is a little infrequent, especially if they're a direct report. Some managers have a lot of direct reports, and so it just becomes that's just, I guess, all the time they can spend on a specific individual on their team. Not really ideal. Maybe that's a good opportunity to bring in a team lead or a middle manager there if you don't have enough time to meet with each one of your direct reports, even for 30, 15 minutes, right? Just give them some time. Employees like to meet with their leadership, share what they're working on, get advice. It's nice to have a regular touch point. And that's an opportunity to invest. Maybe you're not talking about their career ambitions every week. That probably end up being a little redundant. Hopefully their ambitions aren't changing on a weekly basis. But maybe giving some really tactical reinforcement, tactical feedback on the big picture. You need to improve an analytical methodology. So we're meeting on a weekly basis and I'm giving you feedback on your analytical methodology, whether it's reinforcement. You're really nailing that, getting better with your analytical methodology on this latest analysis you've done, or given constructive feedback. It's where the rubber meets the road, where those high-level goals turn into specific feedback and specific actions that you might recommend on a weekly basis. But if you're not meeting with your direct report, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that via email or Teams message. It's nice to do that on a call or in an in-person meeting. So have regular touch points with your team, and at least a quarterly discussion that's dedicated to how they're doing from a career development plan, holding them accountable to the goals set, holding each other accountable. That's what I'd recommend for that. Question number 7 on making sure your analysts have a career development plan. Boy, I could talk a lot about that, as you can tell. Very passionate about leadership and growth. All right, well, I'm going to take just a quick break here to ask if anybody has any questions that you want us to address on this call. You may have come to this call with a specific analytics technique that you need help with. Maybe it's a tool that you have some questions about, or just some general career questions. Again, don't include anything personal or sensitive about your particular company, but if you do have a question, leave it in the chat and we're going to skip right to that. So I'm keeping an eye on that. And if not, we'll continue to talk about analytics maturity. Next question here. Does your organization offer any analyst development learning programs such as regular knowledge sharing meetings, mentorship program, regular office hours, ad hoc trainings, and hackathons? First option, none or hardly any. It's not hard to realize that is not ideal. If you don't have develop initiatives for your analysts, you're kind of leaving them to develop on their own. It's that whole, I expect you to own your development. And there are a lot of resources out there. One of them is what we're doing right now, right? This is a free, I haven't seen this offered too often, just a free opportunity to drop in and ask your questions. You don't have to be a part of a company at all. You can be a part of another company. Now, again, you don't want to share specific things about your company if you are part of a company here. It's not a good forum for it. If you had an in-house one, then you could pull up your data set and ask that person about, if it's an office hours like this, ask this person to really get into it and troubleshoot with you. You'd be able to share your video. I wish we had an opportunity to do that here and share your audio. So, these are really good things to have within an organization to develop your analyst. Sure, there's external trainings. We've got them on our YouTube channel. There's things like this. There's industry events that they could go to, but you're really putting it a lot on the analyst to do that. And just the reality is a lot of analysts probably won't take that kind of initiative, but if it's made available to them and they're encouraged to attend these things within an organization, I think they're probably more likely to partake in that and grow as an analyst through that. See career development, be more efficient, which is good for the company itself as well, and they're going to be happier because they're being developed, and hopefully that development leads to career progression. It's a win-win for everybody. But the thing is, somebody's got to take the initiative to put these programs into place. These things don't just pop up, right? It takes a leader to proactively pursue these things. So whether you're a formal leader, a manager, a director, or so forth, or an individual contributor, and your organization isn't doing these things, but you think it could be helpful, maybe some of these things resonate with you, or maybe even better, you have some ideas yourself on how you could help people analytics-wise or help your organization through analytics or another means, why don't you be that change that you want to see and proactively pursue these yourself? If you're not a leader today, this could be a great way to build your brand as a leader, especially if you want to eventually be a formal leader. We'll start by doing some informal leadership and proactively leading some things like this. So let's talk about each one of these. Regular knowledge sharing meetings, any frequency you want. Monthly might be a good frequency. What's neat about this is, most organizations, most teams have team meetings. If you don't have a team meeting, that's probably an opportunity as well. Going back to not having weekly updates, it's good to have a regular team meeting. I would recommend at least weekly team meeting. In the agile methodology, some teams will get to, especially cross-functional teams, they're getting together on a daily basis each morning talking about updates of what they have done on the previous day. So if you're on a team, you should at least be able to get in a quick 15 or 30, maybe 1 hour meeting in a week, at the very least, right? I mean, that's a minimum level of collaboration, it seems like. But some teams probably aren't meeting that frequently. But even when we think about knowledge sharing meetings, hopefully most teams are at least meeting within themselves. Maybe the sales analytics team is meeting together on a weekly basis. But what's maybe a little less common is to have the analytics teams or even analytics related roles. Think about business intelligence, maybe even your finance team. People that are doing quantitative analysis, analyzing the numbers, whatever role that is, bring them together. Bring the finance analyst, the sales analyst, the marketing analyst, the supply chain analyst, the HR analyst, maybe even the BI team, just inviting people to perhaps an optional meeting where they can come perhaps on a monthly basis or whatever frequency makes sense. And here, a few people, maybe 2 to 4 people. So if it's an hour meeting, they've each got 15 minutes or maybe a half hour to present on a tool that they're using that they think could be helpful to someone else on another team, maybe a technique, data science, A/B testing, or just a methodology for a specific project they did. And what can happen in these meetings is now a sales analyst can look at a finance analyst project or vice versa and say, that's interesting. I actually have a similar project. It's in sales, but it's a similar project, and I could use that methodology, or I could use that tool, or I could use that technique, or even if it's not something they're currently facing, in the future when they face something similar, they keep that in mind. This is one of the best ways, and really there's very few ways to me that you can improve in your analytics methodology. Certainly experience helps, but if it's based on experience, you might be creatively thinking of new approaches over time as you do more and more analysis. But a big way to really accelerate that is to see what other people are doing, especially people outside of your team, and just get exposed to other methods. And then now that kind of creates the creativity process of how can I take those methods and apply it to what I'm doing. Really, you think about just companies in general, how many successful companies have there been that have gone into an industry with a not necessarily a brand new concept, brand new business model, but what they've done is taken a business model that's successful in another industry, and they see a problem in this particular industry they've gone into, and so they take a business model from another industry that works well, and it seems like it could work well for this other industry, and they just apply it. That's kind of what we're doing in these knowledge sharing meetings. You're taking a concept that maybe works well for a finance analyst, and you're applying it to your sales functional area in a way that solves a problem that the sales team is facing as well. Customizing it, of course, make it specific for sales, but this really works. So if your company doesn't have these knowledge sharing meetings across analysts, why not set them up yourself and be that leader? Oh boy, that's going to be great for your brand. Oh yeah, that's the person who sets up those meetings to bring everybody together. Yeah, they're going to see you as a leader in the analytics space. Great opportunity if you're not doing that today. And so you start by just setting up those meetings, talk with your manager about it, make sure you're getting your regular work done, be very efficient with that to make time to kind of facilitate this. It doesn't have to take a long time. Again, you don't even have to be the one presenting. It's going to take maybe a little bit of networking, get to know some analysts outside of your group, bring them together, ask them if they have any interesting projects to present, and do that maybe on a monthly basis, and there you go. It doesn't have to be a big investment of time at all. All right, next initiative, mentorship program. So when you think about this versus the prior one, both are maybe meant to improve the knowledge of analysts in some ways, but a mentorship program is a little more personal. We're talking about bringing maybe 1 or 2 mentors and having them meet with 1 or 2 mentees on a regular basis. Right? So you could have one mentor that's mentoring multiple people at the same time, perhaps if you're short on mentors especially, or in some cases you could have one mentee that has a couple of mentors to give them different perspectives on something. But this can be a really good program for perhaps someone who just joined the analytics group and they're trying to learn some techniques that are used in the organization. And so you have a program to assign them someone who's maybe been an analyst at your organization for a year or more. Or going back to career development opportunities and making those available to your analytics team and beyond, what if you've got some people at your organization who aspire to become an analyst, but they're not there yet? Maybe they're thinking about pursuing a degree program. Maybe they've been taking some trainings online. They're talking with their manager about, I don't know if this is really where I want to be long term. I'm just kind of exploring some options. I'm working here for now. I enjoy the job. I like my company. I'd love to stay with this company, but I've always been interested in analytics. If there were a mentorship program available for them, maybe there's an opportunity for them to partner with an experienced analyst and in one of the analytics teams at that organization. Wouldn't that be great for their career development? And it could be good for the person in the analytics team as well. Could be an opportunity to give them some associate development perspective if that person eventually wants to be a manager and take formal responsibility for someone's development. So it's good in both ways. And what could happen is you set up that mentorship, and maybe the project is something like, maybe this person is on your customer service team, but they want to become an analyst. So perhaps their project is to do some kind of an analysis that could help the customer service team. So it's not just the manager and the customer service team is like, this person, they're taking their time to work on this separate project that's not really going to help me. No, this person is actually they're building skills in a way that actually hopefully is helping your team. And they've got an experienced analyst that's guiding them through that process to make sure it's robust. So it's really a win-win-win, and it creates some opportunities for, let's see, what do we call it? Lateral moves within an organization, right? So this person, it could be a promotion, but it could also just be at a certain point they have an opportunity to go from the customer service team to the analytics team and fulfill their career dream in this case. Wouldn't that be great to be able to help someone get into that career within your organization? Just, that creates a lot of goodwill, and you're not losing people to another organization. Because if you take the approach of, as a manager of the customer service team, for instance, of, well, no, I don't want you to spend your time there. We're not paying you to learn to become an analyst. Well, they're probably going to eventually go to another company if they really want to become an analyst, right? Why not keep them in your company? And as many analytics managers out there know, it can be hard to find a qualified analyst. Well, this is a way to get hands-on, upfront exposure to not just their analytical mindset, but that person's work ethic. That's really hard to assess in an interview. You really get a good picture of what they can do when they're working on a mentorship program. And so you're going to hope, in some cases, this is another good benefit that could come out of it. That person goes through this mentorship program and they realize, being an analyst is a little different than I thought. I actually don't think this is the right career path for me. Great. You were able to figure that out in a matter of maybe a few weeks without investing in a whole, you could pay a lot of money going to college to study that, only to realize that that's not the right career path for you. It's really helpful to figure that out very quickly through something like a low-pressure mentorship program. But on the other hand, you could really prove yourself through that and flourish in that role and learn a lot in that role. And eventually, the analytics team gets very comfortable with the value you're able to provide. Probably still some things to learn over time, but eventually they might feel very good about giving you an offer and be able to, with high confidence, because they've actually seen your work and your work ethic, give you that offer versus hiring someone external where, they're a little bit blind, especially to things like work ethic. They can ask some questions, especially case questions in the interview process. But there's always that wild card of some things that you just don't have exposure to until they come into the organization. So I highly recommend a mentorship program. It's good for the mentor to develop some associate development experience and the mentee to learn some analytic skills. Regular office hours. Okay. When you want to teach analysts new skills, you can do trainings. You can have them go through trainings like we have on our YouTube channel. You can do in-house trainings. But boy, when push comes to shove, they've got to take those concepts. They've got to take Python or data science or SQL, and they've got to apply it to the next step, to a real business use case, maybe the next project they get. And when they do, it's very likely they're going to run into some errors. And they might not have a lot of experience with troubleshooting online. And so they might get really frustrated that they're not able to work through something. I thought I was good. I thought I knew this, but I'm getting an error and I can't figure it out. What do you do? Well, if that's where you're left, you might eventually just give up and go back to doing everything in Excel, right? Well, if you've got your organization a regular office hours, maybe it's once a week, there's an hour where you can, or more frequently, where you can drop in like this meeting, right? Except if it's at a company, you can literally, show up. Maybe it's in a physical room, maybe it's a call, and you can bring up your data set. You can't really do that in this forum and get help working through your problem. Wouldn't it be great to have like an expert in that area that's been training that can help you work through that if you're new to using Python or SQL or data science and give you advice on how to set it up and just help you through that, especially when you're learning? That's going to be critical to really adopting those tools. Now, eventually, you do that enough, you get comfortable with troubleshooting on your own, and you want to be independent. You don't want to have a crutch on another person, right? It's taking up a lot of their time. But especially at first, you're going to run into errors and you're going to need help. And if your company makes available a regular office hours where you can drop in each week if you need it, it's optional, and get some help, that's really going to make it sustainable where they're really going to permanently adopt these new tools and not just get frustrated and go back to doing things the old way. So I recommend setting that up. Ad hoc trainings, we just talked about that. Again, there's plenty of external ones, but if you can do it internally, there's just a little more camaraderie, I guess. You're all at the same firm. You're working together to improve the company. And so if you've got a skill that maybe other people in your group or other analytics roles could benefit from, and a lot of people don't have that skill, that's a great opportunity to just proactively lead a training. And what I would recommend perhaps is partnering with your learning and development group or training group. A lot of organizations have a dedicated training or learning and development team. Partner with them, and they might be able to provide some resources to you, maybe communications to the company, so to make sure everybody that could benefit from this hears about it and has a chance to attend. Maybe they've got some platforms that you can use to lead that training that could be helpful and take your training to the next level. I mean, it really could be as simple as you've networked and you've found out who the analysts are and you send out an email and an invite letting them know that this is available and it's just a regular Teams meeting, and you prepared ahead of time a presentation, maybe a hands-on use case that they can follow along with. That's always good. It usually helps to learn when you're following along and running the code alongside the trainings. That's how a lot of our YouTube videos are. But you can do it informally, but you also might consider reaching out to the learning and development and training team and partnering with them to expand the scope perhaps and maybe get some even better learning tools that are designed to help people learn. And then hackathons. Oh boy, that can be a fun, not just a way to learn, but a way to also solve a business problem. Usually when it comes to a hackathon or a one-day solution, you're trying to use analytics or data science to solve a business challenge, and you're committed to getting a minimum viable product in one day as a team. So you're learning together through that. You're learning from each other. You're building some team working skills, and it's really can be a team builder as well. You don't want to do these every day necessarily, but you probably could benefit from doing maybe one a month even, or one a quarter perhaps. So consider setting these up, any of these, regular knowledge sharing meetings, a mentorship program, regular office hours, maybe doing an ad hoc training on something you think could be helpful for other analysts, or hosting a hackathon on a burning business challenge that nobody's got to yet. If those things aren't being done already, why not be the person who proactively does this? And I don't know that, maybe 1% of organizations or less are probably doing all of these things. And if you are an organization that's already doing all of these things, there's probably other opportunities. So the point is, be efficient at your job, make some time, because some of these things, they don't have to take a lot of time, but they do take a little time. Be efficient with your regular job so you have a little extra time to proactively pursue these things perhaps that resonate with you, or something that will help your company in another way. And all of these are specifically designed for analysts. And so if you're a manager, we talked about you don't need to be a manager to put these in place, but if you are a manager and you look at your organization and say, we don't really have anything in-house that helps analysts improve. We kind of just tell them to own their own development and use external resources. Go to a conference or something. You know, maybe you'd build more skills. Maybe you'd help your analyst team to be more efficient and be able to do more and do more rigorous analysis and identify more sales opportunities and reduction of cost opportunities and improvement of customer experience opportunities through analytics if you actually invested in their development through things like this. If you want the results, you've got to develop them. Maybe you'd have lower turnover and you wouldn't have to spend months trying to find the perfect candidate if you just took your existing analyst and developed them. So it's a call to action for individual contributors who want to become leaders by putting these things in place. It's a call to action for managers who want to truly take analytics at their organization to the next level and get as much value from analytics as possible. All right. Well, we've only got a few more minutes here. Probably have enough time for maybe one or more questions of these. How would you rate your analytics team's openness to using new and improved tools? Not very open. You know, some people will get stuck in their ways. I kind of get it. You've been using this tool for a while. It gets the job done. Why do we need to change, right? I use Excel. I email the reports out each week. They're usually correct. Stakeholders get the data they need. They don't know any better, maybe, and so they don't push on it. They're happy. They don't know that there's maybe an even better experience where they could actually drill into the reports. They don't realize that, you know, maybe if I automated this, I'd be able to give even more and do even more with advanced analytics. But they're happy, and so why do I need to change, right? And so maybe they're resistant to that. And the other thing that can come into play as well is maybe they're a little scared because I can resonate with that. I think I've been scared to try new things as well. I took some of these advanced analytics techniques require coding. It can be a huge efficiency boost, and it can increase your flexibility of what you're able to do. It's no longer, well, this analytics tool doesn't allow for that. It's if you can dream it, you can code it. So there's a lot of benefits to learning, and these are high-level languages. They're not really complex ones like SQL, Python, or SAS. Even Power BI, you know, you have to learn how it works, maybe learn some of the DAX language. So if you haven't coded in the past, it can be intimidating. And I can identify with that because in high school, I took a coding course, and it started with a relatively simple language, but it quickly went to, I think it was C. Boy, that was complex. I did not do well in the course. I think I got a C in the course, which I aspired to do better than that. And it really put a bad taste in my mouth for coding that I just wasn't set up for that. I really enjoyed math, but I was a little scared to code. Didn't do too much coding in college, but then when I got my first job, one of the first things they did was teach me SQL and at the time SAS, which isn't used as much anymore. A lot of people are using Python or R, probably even more so Python these days. But SAS at the time and SQL. And I went through a class, very supportive training session, and then from there had a good analyst community around me where I could ask questions if I really couldn't figure out an error on my own. And I was able to learn SQL and SAS. Someone who just thought I would never be a coder. I was very intimidated by that, but I had training, I had a good community around me, and I was able to learn. So it kind of goes back to some of the previous steps. Those development initiatives, weekly office hours, those proactive trainings, those are important if you want to see your analytics, team transform from manual processes to automated interactive dashboards. You need to set up those development programs. But analysts who are used to doing Excel might be a little intimidated by the prospect of coding. And so you've got to make those resources available. Make sure they know that these languages are not the typical coding languages, they're higher level languages, and make sure they know the benefits and that they see the benefits. That this is going to help your work-life balance be better. You're not going to have to stay up late when a fire drill comes up because you've got to do all the point and click manually. You're going to have reusable assets created, or you're going to be able to code that out much quicker eventually once you learn these skills. And we've got support for you, weekly office hours where you can get help, one-on-one mentorships where you can have a mentor work with you on it. So those are some things that can help when you have an analytics team that's not very open to learning new skills. Maybe they're somewhat open, but usually don't prioritize learning or incorporating them. You really got to hold yourself and your team accountable. So often we say, yeah, I know, I need to stop doing this manually. One of these days I'm going to learn SQL. One of these days I'm going to start using Power BI or Python. How many times have you heard that? Maybe you've heard it from yourself or someone else. At a certain point, you just have to say, it might take a little bit longer this time to learn this, but I'm going to apply it. Just taking that first step of saying, I'm just gonna open up a Jupyter notebook if you're trying to learn Python, and I'm just gonna set a variable. I'm gonna do a print statement. Just that first step of downloading it and getting started, that is one of the biggest steps in the process, really. And we've got trainings on our site, on our YouTube channel, on just starting from the very beginning of how do you even download Python. How do you download Power BI? That's where we start with our trainings. And that's where you should start as well. If you're starting a training, it's just here's how to just simply get started. From there, you can continue on and learn some more advanced techniques. But if you just get started with it, that is such a big step to prioritizing. So if you've been maybe making some excuses or putting off learning some of these advanced analytics tools, let me just encourage you, take an hour or two today. You can use our trainings or another training. Just start to go through it and at least download the thing and maybe just do one simple thing in it. That's it. Now at least you've overcome that barrier of starting. Makes such a big difference. And then of course, where you kind of hope analytics teams are very open and often prioritizing learning or incorporating them. Now I like to think in the past that I am very passionate about using the most efficient tools. And I historically have been. I've helped teams go from Excel to Power BI and to learn Python to automate things, and for Python to do data science and all kinds of migration to more advanced tools. And one of the things I'm kind of noticing lately is the benefit that artificial intelligence platforms like ChatGPT as an example, how big of a productivity boost that can be. And so I've started to do several ChatGPT trainings on the website, and there's other AI forums as well out there that you can use to really accelerate and automate tasks. But you have to be careful with those. Before you go and feed your data set to ChatGPT, you want to be careful, because the data that you feed could be used for training purposes. And so there's settings you can set. ChatGPT, for instance, has an enterprise edition that doesn't use training data. But before you do anything like that with your personal data or your company data, you want to talk with your manager, maybe even their manager. You want to talk with your IT group and make sure they are comfortable with that. That's a big mistake that I think people have made, is feeding ChatGPT personal data. But at the same time, it can be a valuable tool. So that's another one that's maybe worth looking into. I'm just speaking like from personal experience here, where I've historically coded things out on my own, and you build an analytical thought process on that. But I'm seeing more and more how ChatGPT can give me some good starting code. You've got to check it. Sometimes ChatGPT will not always code something in a robust way. It usually does a really good job, but you've got to check it. So even if you do use ChatGPT for coding, and you probably, it's still worth investing in learning SQL and Python so that you can assess the code and see if there's any adjustments you need to make. But it can leave you with some really good starting code. Don't give it sensitive use cases or data. Cannot express that enough. But that's a relatively new technology, and it could be an analytics tool that now more and more analysts and companies are starting to become comfortable with. Can't emphasize enough the privacy aspect, though. You've got to do that properly, and there's a lot of ways to think about that and avoid giving ChatGPT sensitive information. So don't take that and just say, I'm going to download ChatGPT and upload a data set. No, no. If it's public data set, fine. But you really want to be careful there and double check that with your IT and management group. All right, well, it looks like that's our time today. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of the analytics maturity discussion here. If you have any questions on techniques, soft skills as it relates to analytics, or career questions, please bring them to our next analytics office hours every Friday, 10 Eastern, live on YouTube. Come back, ask your questions. We'll try to answer them. And if we don't have any questions, we'll go through an analytics topic. We've got several more questions, about 25 more questions to go through on this quiz. We'll just have a discussion like we did today about how you can take your analytics team and maybe your skills as an analyst individually to the next level. Love to help analysts do that. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. If you're watching this in the future, I hope this session was helpful, and hopefully we'll see you next Friday. Thanks.